Welcome back. Now it's time to do some reciprocals and negative indices, which in layman's terms just means we're going to be swapping numerators and denominators on a fraction. We're just going to do that. All right, reciprocals first. Let's have a look. Okay, what does this mean? Reciprocals of n, a reciprocal of n equals 1 over n. Ignore that for a minute. This is much easier to see. See how this is written as a fraction? M over n. The reciprocal of m over n is just n over m. All we've done is the m from the top, from the numerator, has become the denominator down the bottom. The n down the bottom has become the numerator on top. All right, how does that apply here? N. If we were to write n as a fraction, how would we write it? Yep, that'd be n over 1, wouldn't it? So n over 1 becomes 1 over n. It's pretty straightforward. And this is what it means. Reciprocal is basically where you swap a numerator and denominator, as I said. Let's have a look at a couple of examples. The reciprocal of 5 over 2. Well, that's already as a fraction, isn't it? So all we need to do is flip the fraction. 5 over 2 becomes 2 over 5. Next example, reciprocal of 3x. Now 3x, that's not a fraction, is it? So good idea, you don't have to, but it's a good idea to write it as a fraction. So 3x is just the same as 3x over 1. Now all we need to do is flip that fraction, and we have 1 over 3x. Straightforward, isn't it? No. Get a little bit of practice on reciprocals. You can hit pause now, and we'll come back shortly, and we'll have a look at actual negative indices. Okay, negative indices, you're back. Excellent. So what are negative indices? Why do we use negative indices? We touched on it in one of the previous videos. Negative indices are fine, but all they allow us to do is use fractions just on one straight line. For example, 5 to the power of negative 1. We can write that. Who prefers writing positive or working with positive numbers than negative numbers? Me, I do. Absolutely. Most people do. They're just negatives, but it's just neater and easier with positive numbers. So we can write that as, using the reciprocal rule, we can write 5 to the power of negative 1 with a positive index. Now, it says write the term as a fraction here. Now the term, remember, here's your index, and this is your term, 5. It could be a variable, it could be a pronumeral, a variable. In this case, it's the number 5, which can't change. So that's a term. All right, 5 to the power of negative 1. How do we write 5 as a fraction? 5 over 1, correct. So we rewrite it as 5 over 1 to the power of negative 1. Now, the next part is to get rid of a negative index, use the reciprocal rule. So, what was the reciprocal rule again? We had to flip that fraction. So let's flip the fraction and make the index positive. That's a bit you've got to remember, make the index positive. So that becomes 1 over 5, but what happens to the negative 1? Becomes positive 1. Now, anything to the power of 1 is just the anything. 10 to the 1 is 10. 100 to the 1 is 100. 1/5 to the power of 1 is just 1/5. Okay. Next example, 3 over 5 to the power of negative 1. Well, again, that's already a fraction, so that's easy. So all we need to do is flip the fraction. And remember, we're going to be making that a positive, so that'll just become to the power of 1. There's the fraction flipped. Do I need to write the power of 1? Nope, don't need it. As soon as it's 1, done. One more example. What if, though, it's not to the power of negative 1, it's to the power of negative 2, or negative 3, or negative 10? Well, here we go. 3 to the power of 5. 3 over 5 to the power of negative 2. So first thing we're going to want to do is flip the fraction to get rid of the negative index. So let's flip the fraction and change it to a positive 2. Now, if you remember back to your index laws, Index law number 3 said to the power, that's 5 to the power of 1, to another power, isn't it? So that 2 applies to the 5. It also applies to the 3. So we can write that as, we're getting rid of the brackets essentially, but we can write it as 5 squared over 3 squared. 5 squared is 25. 3 squared is 9. Straightforward. Okay. Maybe get a little bit of practice on those basic ones. But this is the important bit. Remember this. Any term that is swapped from denominator to numerator or numerator to denominator, you have to change the sign of the index. If it's negative up top, it becomes positive down the bottom. If it's negative down the bottom, it becomes positive up the top. You can do it with positive ones too. If it's positive up top, it becomes negative down the bottom. So if you're going top to bottom, you have to change positive to negative or negative to positive, whichever way you're going. Okay? They're not always going to be simple ones like that. We're going to get some mixed indices. So what do we do there? Where we have some positives and some negative indices. Well, same rules apply. Swap the terms with negative indices, but leave the positive ones alone. Here's an example. X to the power of 6 times, down some times in there, remember, y to the power of negative 2. That's all on one line. It's not written as a fraction. But we only need to move that y to the power of negative 2. The x to the power of 6 is going to stay the same. So let's move that y to the power of 2 to the denominator. So we'll write x to the power of 6 on top and put the y. But remember, when you shift that y down the bottom, it becomes positive 2. So just bring it down the bottom and put it down the bottom. Next example, 10a cubed, b to the power of negative 4 over c to the power of negative 8. Well, 10's a positive, a cubed is a positive. Actually, well, I say 10's a positive there. And if that was negative 10, then that negative 10 is still a positive because it's not the negative out the front we're worried about. It's the index. That's 10 to the power of 1. So whatever that number is, if it's got a positive index or nothing there at all, then it's a positive. So we just leave it alone. Okay. So the 10 and the a terms have positive indices, so they stay put where they are. So we'll write it as 10a cubed on top of the line. The b has a negative index, so that's going to shift down the bottom, down here. Let's see how we've left the negative up top, and it's become positive down the bottom. The c is also a negative index, negative 8. So on top is going to be c to the power of 8. Pretty straightforward. Again, negative swaps. If it's on top, goes to the bottom. If it's on the bottom, goes to the top. Last example. This one's a bit uglier. 10a cubed, b to the power of 4, divided by 9a to the power of 7, b to the negative 2, c to the power of 4. Oh, now you can do it that way. But if you have a look at these two, that's an easy one, so it's an easy swap. But it actually looks neater as a fraction, doesn't it? What does a divide by mean? It even looks like a fraction. Dot over dot. So we rewrite it as a fraction. So we're going to write on top 18a cubed b to the power of 4 over this second part. So it's just all come down here. A cubed b4 over 9a7 b to the power of negative 2 c to the power of 4. Next bit. Let's simplify the constant values. Now get the numbers out of the way. Don't need them. 18 over 9. 18 divided by 9 is 2. Correct? So it's going to end up on 2. 2 on top. All right. Next one. Shift any terms with a negative index. So b to the negative 2 from the bottom goes to the top. Any other negative indices? Nope, just the b. All right, last step. write in all of the other terms and use the index laws to simplify. So all the other terms, the a cubed stays up top, the b to the 4 stays up top, the a to the 7 stays down the bottom, the c to the 4 stays down the bottom. Okay. Now we can simplify. Now you remember how to simplify? Our brains actually work really well alphabetically. We're programmed that way. So I like to start with the A's, go B's, C's. Doesn't matter. A times B is still B times A. If you remember back to your algebra, means the same thing. But A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z's, whatever you're using, works just as well. All right, so let's have a look. The 2 is going to stay at the front. So now let's look at the A's. How many A's have I got? I've got 3 A's on top. I've got 7 A's on the bottom, remembering our index laws. Where have I got more A's? I've got 4 more A's on the bottom, haven't I? So that's A to the 4 down the bottom. What about B's? I've got B squared there, and I've got B to the power of 4 there. So no B's on the bottom. So how many B's do I have on top? 2 plus 4 is 6. And the C's, well, there's no C's on top. I've only got the 4 C's on the bottom. So C to the power 4 comes down the bottom. That's it. Once it's written as a fraction, all you're doing is collecting all similar things together and simplifying. All right, time to go get some practice. Good luck with it all.